Welcome back to the deep dive. We are diving into one of the most, well, fundamental, maybe frustrating, but definitely fascinating topics in all of psychology. Personality. It's that consistent core that makes you you.
And defining it is really key, isn't it? We look at personality as the relatively stable set of psychological characteristics.
Yeah.
And those enduring patterns of behavior that make every single individual unique.
Right.
It accounts for that deep consistency in how you act, how you think, how you feel over time.
And across different situations, too.
Exactly.
So our mission today is to give you the ultimate shortcut, maybe, to understanding this whole big topic. We've gathered the sources that map out the entire intellectual history of personality psychology.
That's quite a journey.
It really is. And we're going to structure it around the four major perspectives. You've got psychodynamic, trait, social cognitive, and humanistic. And we'll distill what each school of thought argues is the primary shaper of your identity. Is it, deep-seated unconscious conflict or something measurable, like behavior?
And if we want to trace that map of personality, well, we absolutely have to start with its architect, Sigmund Freud. His psychoanalytic theory was really the first major comprehensive attempt to explain the whole self.
The whole shebang.
Pretty much, positing that personality and behavior are fundamentally shaped by forces and conflicts residing deep within the unconscious. It was revolutionary. And, arguably the catalyst for everything that followed.
Okay, let's unpack this psychoanalytic foundation then. You said it's built on four major pillars: levels of consciousness, the structure of personality, defense mechanisms, and those psychosexual stages.
That's right. It's kind of the original blueprint for the human mind, as Freud saw it. So Freud's model of the mind is famously described as an iceberg, right? The smallest, most visible tip above the waterline. That's the conscious mind.
Your present awareness, what I'm thinking right now.
Exactly. What you are thinking and focusing on right this second.
Then, just below the surface but still reachable, that's the preconscious.
Correct. This holds contents that aren't actively in your thoughts, but you can easily bring them into awareness if you focus.
Like remembering what I had for breakfast.
Yeah, or the name of your third-grade teacher, perhaps. Stuff that's accessible with a little effort.
Okay.
But the vast, submerged, and truly powerful mass, that's the unconscious. This area lies completely outside the range of ordinary awareness. Freud saw it as the repository for all the troubling, unacceptable urges, impulses, memories, ideas.
Stuff that would cause chaos if it surfaced.
Pretty much. Things that would cause massive psychological distress if they became conscious.
What's crucial here, though, is the sheer volume he proposed. Freud argued that the unconscious isn't just a small basement room, it's where the majority of the mind's content lives.
That's the claim. We are utterly unaware of our deepest wishes and urges, yet he believed they drive the majority of our motivations and our behavior.
That's a huge, almost frightening claim about human agency, isn't it? That we're mostly driven by things we don't even know are there.
It absolutely is. And that leads directly into the second pillar, the structure of personality, which Freud saw as essentially an internal battleground.
Fought by three competing mental entities: the id, ego, and superego.
Exactly.
Okay, let's start with the primal energy source, the id. Where does this operate and what's its main goal?
The I operates only in the unconscious. It's the primitive, innate structure we're born with, driven purely by the pleasure principle.
Pleasure principle, meaning?
Its sole demand is for instant gratification. Doesn't care about consequences, rules, reality. None of that matters. If it wants something, it demands it now.
So like a demanding toddler with zero impulse control.
That's a perfect analogy, actually. Powerful, demanding, utterly unreasonable.
And what steps in to balance that screaming toddler? Is that the superego?
Well, the superego is the other extreme. It's the opposite force, really. It acts as the internal moral guardian or conscience.
Okay. The angel on the shoulder.
Sort of. It internalizes all the societal rules, parental shoulds and shouldn'ts, moral expectations. It constantly seeks perfection and judges the id's desires, often very harshly. That's where guilt comes from in Freud's view.
Okay, so we have the primal id screaming, "I want it now!" And the moralistic superego screaming, "You can't have that, it's wrong." And caught squarely in the middle.
It was the poor ego, the middle manager trying to keep the whole system from exploding.
Right, and it operates differently.
Yes, the ego operates according to the reality principle. Its job is to find a realistic, socially appropriate way to satisfy the id's demands without excessively upsetting the superego.
So it's constantly negotiating.
Constantly. The dynamic interplay, the shifting balance between these three, id, ego, superego, that's the mechanism Freud claimed, determines pretty much every aspect of our behavior.
And when that negotiation fails, when the ego realizes it just can't satisfy the id, or maybe when a really troubling unconscious desire threatens to bubble up and cause massive anxiety, what happens then?
That's when it throws up psychological shields. These are the defense mechanisms.
Ah, the third concept. Okay.
The defense mechanisms are basically unconscious psychological strategies. The ego uses them to reduce anxiety by, well, distorting or denying reality in some way.
And the most critical one, the foundation.
Is repression, often called motivated forgetting. This mechanism actively pushes unacceptable desires, painful memories, threatening thoughts down deep into the unconscious, out of awareness.
Done!
Not really gone, just buried. But out of sight, out of mind, hopefully reducing anxiety.
Okay. And we've all heard of the others. They seem to offer great insight into, daily psychological conflicts, like projection.
Right. With projection, instead of acknowledging your own unacceptable impulse, let's say, intense anger towards someone, you project that feeling onto them. You convince yourself they're the one who's angry at you.
It shifts the blame, relieves the internal pressure.
Exactly. Or consider rationalization, creating a logical sounding but false justification for an action that was actually driven by unacceptable motives.
Like if I splurge on something expensive, I might rationalize it by saying, oh, it was on sale, I actually saved money, even though I just wanted it.
Precisely. And then there's one that's actually seen as more constructive. Sublimation.
Sublimation. That's fascinating, because it's like the ego's ultimate trick, right?
You could say that. It involves channeling unacceptable impulses, maybe intense aggression or raw sexual energy, into something socially constructive, even admired.
Like someone with aggressive urges becoming a surgeon or competitive athlete.
Exactly. The raw energy is still there, but it's transformed into a socially acceptable, even valuable pursuit. The unacceptable impulse gets channeled constructively.
But these repressed desires, they aren't perfectly hidden, are they? Freud believed they kind of leak out.
Yes, he believed they manifest in disguised forms. Symbols in our dreams, maybe neurotic symptoms, and of course the famous Freudian slips.
Those slips of the tongue.
Right, saying one thing when you apparently mean another. Freud saw these as moments where an underlying repressed thought or wish briefly breaks through the defenses.
Okay, that brings us to the fourth and maybe the most contested pillar. The psychosexual stages of development.
Definitely the most controversial. Freud claimed that personality develops through 5 distinct stages, and each stage is defined by how the child seeks physical pleasure from different erogenous zones.
And the key mechanism linking these childhood stages to adult personality is fixation.
Correct. If a child experiences unresolved conflict, or maybe too much or too little gratification during a specific stage, they can become fixated, stuck in a way.
And they carry personality traits or behavior patterns from that stage into adulthood.
That's the idea. So the first stage is the oral stage, infancy. The focus of pleasure is the mouth-sucking, biting, mouthing.
And fixation here could lead to
Adult traits like excessive eating, smoking, maybe being very talkative or conversely verbally aggressive or sarcastic. And oral fixation.
Okay.
Next up, the anal stage, usually around toddlerhood, coinciding with toilet training. Here, gratification centers on the control of elimination, holding on or letting go.
Right, and this is where it gets specific and maybe where modern science starts to raise an eyebrow. You're saying my friend's obsessive neatness could genuinely stem from harsh toilet training.
According to classic Freudian theory, yes, that's precisely the link. If toilet training is overly harsh, controlling, or maybe punitive, it could lead to what Freud called the anal retentive personality.
Traits like
Orderliness, obsessive cleanliness, stinginess, maybe being very controlling. Conversely, if training was very lax or messy, it might lead to the anal expulsive personality.
which is
Traits like messiness, carelessness, disorganization, perhaps even rebelliousness. It connects early parenting style directly to adult character.
It feels like a huge leap looking back, but historically this explanation was massive.
Okay.
That leads us to the phallic stage.
Usually around ages 3 to 6, erotic attention shifts to the phallic region, the genitals. And this stage is defined by the emergence of the Oedipus complex.
The famous one.
The famous one. The child develops according to Freud, incestuous feelings toward the opposite gender parent and starts to see the same gender parent as a rival for affection.
And resolving this complex is crucial for development.
Absolutely. For the boy, resolving it involves identifying with a father, taking on his characteristics partly as a way to indirectly possess the mother. And importantly, this identification process is how the superego gets firmly established.
And this is where the gender-specific dynamics get incredibly complex and, frankly, really controversial today. Boys supposedly experience castration anxiety.
Yes, the unconscious fear that the father will punish them for their rivalrous, incestuous desires by, well, castration. It's a powerful motivator for identification.
And for girls, this is where Freud introduced penis envy.
He did. He argued that girls realize they lack a penis, which leads them to feel inherently inferior or inadequate. This desire for a penis, he thought, drives their development. Now, this specific idea
Has been widely criticized and largely rejected.
hugely criticized, yes, by modern psychology and even by many of his own followers at the time. It led to significant breaks within the psychoanalytic movement.
To try and create some symmetry, some later psychodynamic theorists used the term electra complex for girls, right? A parallel dynamic.
The term was introduced, yes, describing the girl identifying with the mother after realizing she can't possess the father, sort of a parallel resolution path. But it wasn't Freud's original formulation.
Okay. After the intensity of the phallic stage, things cool down.
Yes, we move into the latency stage, roughly from age 6 to puberty. Sexual impulses become latent or dormant. The child's energy is redirected towards school, friendships, developing skills.
And then puberty hits.
And we enter the final stage, the genital stage. This begins around puberty and continues through adulthood. The focus shifts back to the genitals, but now in the context of mature sexuality, romantic love, and potentially procreation.
It's a lot. And it's clear why a theory based so intensely on infantile sexuality and aggression might have needed some updates or revisions.
Exactly. And that's precisely what the Neo-Freudians offered.
They didn't throw it all out, though.
No, not at all. They maintained the core importance of the unconscious mind. But they decisively shifted the emphasis. They placed lesser importance on those purely sexual and aggressive motivations.
And more
on social relationships and the development of the ego or self, seeing personality development as continuing throughout the lifespan, not just fixed in early childhood.
Okay, like Carl Jung, he was a prominent early dissenter, right?
Very prominent. Jung placed much greater emphasis on the present and unconscious processes. Things like self-awareness, pursuing goals. He didn't lock personality solely into infancy.
And he introduced that idea of the collective unconscious.
Yes, a really fascinating concept.
Yeah.
He believed that beyond our personal unconscious, holding our own specific repressed memories and urges, there exists a deeper layer, a shared, inherited psychic reservoir.
Shared by all humans.
That was his idea, containing ancestral memories and primal images he called archetypes. These reflect universal human experiences, the mother, the hero, the shadow or dark side. It broadened the scope of the psyche way beyond just the individual and their family.
Then there's Alfred Adler. He developed something called individual psychology.
Yes, Adler really emphasized the unique potential within each person. He put great faith in the creative self, the part of our personality that's aware of itself, that actively organizes our goal-seeking behavior. He saw us as much more self-directed.
And he's the source of that very recognizable term, the inferiority complex.
He is. Adler argued that feelings of inadequacy, which, naturally arise in children simply because they are small and dependent, are a primary driver of personality development.
Driving us to compensate.
Exactly. Spurring a need to overcome those feelings through what he called the drive for superiority. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean dominating others.
More like striving for personal achievement.
Precisely. Striving for competence, completion, becoming better. We're all striving to overcome some perceived deficit, according to Adler.
And speaking of the need to compensate, or perhaps challenge compensation, we have to talk about Karen Horney. She wasn't just a Neo-Freudian, she was a really staunch, vocal critic of Freud's views on women.
Absolutely. Her work was groundbreaking. She shifted the focus dramatically toward the roles of social and cultural forces in shaping personality, rather than just innate drives like sex and aggression.
She thought abnormal behavior stemmed from what?
From disturbed relationships, particularly in childhood. Things like feeling isolated, helpless, or rejected by parents could lead to what she called basic anxiety or basic hostility. These unresolved social conflicts shaped a personality. And crucially, she completely rejected penis envy as biologically determined.
Didn't she famously counter Freud with the idea of womb envy?
She did, a brilliant counterargument. She suggested that men might experience envy related to women's ability to bear children, a fundamental biological creativity. She argued that maybe men's intense drive for achievement and creation in the external world could be seen as an overcompensation for this difference.
Wow. That's turning the tables completely, especially back then.
A complete psychological power shift in the 1930s, yes.
So, summing up the psychodynamic school, strengths.
Undeniably, it's one of the most detailed, comprehensive theories of personality ever developed. It forced psychology to grapple with the idea that there's more to us than what's on the surface, the power of hidden mental processes.
But the criticisms are pretty severe, too.
Very severe. Too much focus on sex and aggression for many. Too little emphasis, perhaps, on social relationships and learning, at least in Freud's original theory. And the biggest hurdle, the science. The extreme difficulty in scientifically testing many of its key components. How do you objectively measure the Oedipus complex? Or prove the existence of penis envy? Or map the specific contents of the unconscious? That lack of empirical validation is its primary limitation.
Okay, so if the psychodynamic school gave us this deep, complex, maybe murky theory of unconscious conflict, the trait perspective seems like a breath of fresh empirical air.
It really does represent a different approach. Trait theorists fundamentally disagree with the Freudian focus on hidden depths. They argue that personality consists of a distinctive set of relatively stable or enduring characteristics traits.
Things we can actually observe and measure.
Exactly. And if we can identify and measure these core traits, the thinking goes, we can describe personality and predict behavior across time and situations. It's much more focused on description and prediction, less on deep underlying explanation of why.
So who started mapping these traits? Gordon Allport was one of the pioneers.
He was. Allport provided one of the earliest systematic attempts. He believed traits are inherited, but also influenced by experience, and he proposed a hierarchy based on how influential a trait is.
A hierarchy. Okay.
At the very top, he put cardinal traits. These are rare, extremely pervasive dimensions that essentially define an individual's entire personality. Think of historical figures almost synonymous with a single quality.
Like Machiavellian, or maybe Mother Teresa's altruism.
Exactly. Traits that dominate almost everything the person does. But Allport believed very few people actually have these single defining cardinal traits.
More common.
Central traits. These are the basic building blocks of personality. The handful of traits, maybe 5 to 10, that you'd use to describe a friend in a letter of recommendation. Things like honest, sociable, anxious, intelligent.
The core characteristics.
The core characteristics. And finally, at the bottom are secondary traits. These are much more specific, influencing behavior only in a few limited situations.
Like a preference for certain kinds of music or getting impatient specifically when driving?
Precisely. Not core to the personality, but part of the overall picture.
Okay. Then Raymond Cattell came along and used statistics to try and simplify this map.
Yes, Cattell used a powerful statistical technique called factor analysis. He wanted to find the underlying structure. He proposed 2 basic levels of traits. First, there are the surface traits.
These are the ones we see directly.
Right. Characteristics we can infer directly just by observing someone's behavior, like noticing someone is often stubborn, or maybe quick-tempered, or seems very thoughtful.
Just describing what's on the surface.
Exactly. But Cattell noticed that these surface traits tend to cluster together. Someone who's thoughtful might also be quiet and reserved. Someone stubborn might also be argumentative.
Okay.
So he argued these clusters arise from a smaller number of deeper underlying traits that we have to infer. He called these source traits.
Ah, so the source traits are the real root causes.
That was his view. These are the more fundamental, general factors that give rise to the consistent patterns we see in the surface traits. For example, a whole cluster of surface traits like being shy, reserved, liking solitude might all spring from the single underlying source trait of introversion.
We're trying to find the basic dimensions, and we can't talk about simplification without mentioning Hans Eyck. We took it even further, right?
Radically further. Eyck distilled the structure of personality down to just 3 major superfactors, or dimensions.
Only 3. What were they?
He focused on 3 core dimensions, which he also believed had strong biological, maybe even genetic roots. First, introversion-extroversion.
The classic difference between being solitary and reserved versus outgoing and sociable.
Exactly. Second, neuroticism. This dimension captures the tendency toward emotional instability, anxiety, worry, moodiness. High neuroticism means easily upset. Low means emotionally stable.
Okay. And the third?
Psychoticism. Now, this term is a bit misleading today. It doesn't necessarily mean psychotic in the clinical sense. It refers more to a tendency to be perceived as cold, maybe impulsive, egocentric, and even antisocial.
So introversion, extroversion, neuroticism, and psychoticism. And he thought these were biologically based.
Yes, Eysenck strongly believed that individual differences in these three core dimensions were largely due to underlying biological differences, particularly in brain functioning and arousal levels.
The beauty of this whole trait approach seems to be how it eventually led to a kind of consensus model, something standardized and widely accepted.
Absolutely. Which brings us to the modern dominant trait model, the five-factor model, FFM, often just called the Big Five.
The Big Five. This is the one most people might have heard of.
It really is the empirical consensus today. It represents the most reliable, cross-culturally validated way to describe the basic structure of personality using five broad, relatively independent dimensions. We usually remember them using the acronym OCEAN.
OCEAN. Okay, let's break that down, because this is really the language psychologists use now to categorize personality traits. O is for.
O is for openness, sometimes called openness to experience. This describes the breadth, depth, and complexity of an individual's mental and experiential life.
So high openness means?
High openness means you're likely imaginative, curious, you appreciate art and adventure, you're open to new feelings, new ideas, unconventional values. Low openness means you're more likely to be conventional, practical, prefer routine, have narrower interests.
Okay. C is for?
C is for conscientiousness. This is a measure of organization, persistence, control, and motivation in goal-directed behavior.
So high conscientiousness sounds like someone very reliable.
Very reliable.
Yeah.
Disciplined, careful, thorough, punctual, achievement-oriented. They're often excellent planners and follow through. Low conscientiousness means someone might be more careless, disorganized, easily distracted, maybe more spontaneous but less dependable.
And this one, conscientiousness, you hear it's really important for life outcomes.
Incredibly important. Studies consistently show that high conscientiousness is probably the single best Big Five predictor of academic success and job performance across almost all fields.
Why is that?
Well, it translates directly into organized effort, persistence, following rules, meeting deadlines, skills that are valuable almost everywhere.
Makes sense. Okay, next is E. That's extroversion.
Right. This refers to the quantity and intensity of interpersonal interaction, activity level, need for stimulation, and capacity for joy, where you get your energy.
High extroversion means you're the life of the party.
Often, yes. Outgoing, sociable, assertive, talkative, warm. They tend to thrive in large groups and feel energized by social interaction. Low extroversion, which we usually just call introversion, means someone is more reserved, quiet, independent, maybe task-oriented rather than people-oriented. They often recharge by spending time alone.
Okay, A is for?
A is for agreeableness. This dimension reflects individual differences in concern for cooperation and social harmony.
So high agreeableness means you're
Essentially, yes. Trusting, helpful, cooperative, sympathetic, forgiving, good-natured. They generally seek social harmony and avoid conflict. Low agreeableness means someone might be more skeptical, competitive, suspicious, stubborn, perhaps even antagonistic or irritable.
Right. And finally, N, that's neuroticism, same as Eysenck's term.
Basically the same concept, yes. The tendency to experience negative emotions. High neuroticism means one is prone to anxiety, worry, anger, depression, self-consciousness, mood swings, general emotional volatility.
And low neuroticism?
Low neuroticism means someone is generally calm, emotionally secure, even tempered, resilient, handles stress well, often labeled as high emotional stability.
Wow. Okay, OCEAN, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, and the utility here seems immense. You said they predict all sorts of things.
They do. Beyond job performance, they predict relationship satisfaction and longevity. High agreeableness and low neuroticism help there. They predict overall psychological well-being, low neuroticism again. They even predict health behaviors and longevity to some extent.
Are there any criticisms left of the Big Five? It sounds pretty solid.
It's very solid, but the main lingering critique is a bit technical. It's the question of whether these five factors are truly, perfectly independent or orthogonal in all populations and contexts. There might be some subtle correlations between them, but overall it's the most robust descriptive model we have.
So evaluating the whole trait perspective, strengths are clear, it's intuitive, we use trait terms all the time, it's scientifically measurable, and it's incredibly useful for developing personality tests.
Absolutely. Those are major strengths.
But the core criticism remains. Trait theories are great at describing personality, but not so great at explaining it.
Exactly. If I say someone scores high on extroversion, I've described their tendency to be outgoing, but I haven't really explained why they are that way. Is it their brain chemistry? How they were raised? A conscious choice? The theory itself doesn't always provide the why.
And there's the other point. Is behavior really that stable across situations? Don't people act differently at a party versus in a library?
That's the situationist critique. Walter Mischel famously challenged the idea of stable traits, arguing that the situation often has a stronger influence on behavior than underlying personality,
Which led to the modern consensus view.
which is a synthesis, really, called interactionism.
Ow!
The widely held belief today is that behavior is never solely determined by internal traits, nor solely by the external situation. It's always the result of the continuous interaction between the person and the situation.
Your traits influence how you perceive and react to situations, and the situation influences which of your traits get expressed.
Precisely. An extrovert might seek out parties, while an introvert avoids them. But even the extrovert might be quiet in a library. Both personality and situation matter, and they interact constantly.
And this interaction idea extends to the whole nature-nurture debate regarding traits.
Definitely. The research now is quite clear. Genetics accounts for a significant portion of the variability in the big five traits. Estimates usually fall between 40% and maybe 55%.
So a big chunk is inherited temperament.
A very significant chunk. But here's the really deep insight from modern behavioral genetics and neuroscience. The relationship is a two-way street. It's not just genes determining traits.
How so?
Genes influence our predispositions, our basic temperament. But our environment, especially early life experiences, literally affects the developing brain gene expression, can be turned up or down by experience. This physically influences how those genetic predispositions actually manifest as personality traits later on.
So it's a cycle. My genetic temperament might make me seek out certain experiences.
Right, an inherently curious child, openness, might seek out books and museums.
And those experiences then reinforce or maybe even modify that initial tendency.
Exactly. Genes influence the environments we select and create, and those environments, in turn, feedback and shape the expression of our genes and the development of our traits. It's a continuous, dynamic interplay.
Okay, so if the trait perspective got criticized for maybe just labeling behavior without fully explaining its origins, the social cognitive perspective seems to step right into that gap. It asks, how do we learn our personality and how do our thoughts guide our actions?
That's a great way to put it. It's a shift in focus.
Right.
You had traditional behaviorism, think Watson and Skinner.
All about conditioning,
Yeah.
rewards and punishment.
Exactly.
Okay.
They basically argued that personality was nothing more than the sum total of an individual's learned behaviors, determined entirely by their unique history of reinforcement and punishment. You were simply what you were conditioned to be. No mind needed, really.
But social cognitive theory, emerging mid-century, brought the mind back.
Absolutely. It revolutionized learning theory by reintroducing cognition mental processes, thoughts, beliefs, expectations back into the equation. They see personality not as some fixed internal thing, but as an individual's repertoire of behaviors and, crucially, their unique ways of thinking about themselves and the world.
And the key players here were Julian Rotter, Albert Bandura, Walter Mischel.
Those are the foundational contributors, yes. Let's start with Julian Rotter and his hugely influential concept, the locus of control.
Locus of control, I've heard that term a lot.
It's a big one. Rotter believed that predicting behavior isn't just about past rewards. It depends on several cognitive factors. One is our expectancies, our personal predictions about the likely outcomes of a specific behavior in a given situation.
Like if I study for this test, I expect I'll probably pass.
Right. Another is the subjective value we place on those outcomes. Passing might be highly valuable to you, or maybe not so much.
Okay.
But the locus of control ties this together more broadly. It refers to our general expectation about whether we can actually obtain the reinforcements we seek. Do you generally feel like you are in charge of your life's outcomes?
Or are you just kind of pushed around by fate?
Exactly. An internal locus of control means the individual generally believes that they can obtain desired outcomes. Success, happiness, rewards, through their own hard work, effort, skills, and choices.
So if they succeed, they credit themselves. If they fail.
They tend to think, what could I have done differently? I should have studied harder, or I need to practice more. They feel a sense of personal agency and control.
And the opposite.
An external locus of control. This means the individual generally believes that what happens to them is largely controlled by external forces. Fate, luck, chance, powerful other people, societal structures, things outside their personal control.
So if they fail that same test,
They're more likely to think the test was unfair, the teacher doesn't like me, or it was just bad luck. And this core belief, this locus of control, fundamentally influences whether they persist after failure or just give up. It shapes motivation dramatically.
that makes a lot of sense. Okay, next up, Albert Bandura. He really transformed our understanding of learning itself, didn't he?
Completely. Bandura argued strongly that people aren't just passive recipients of environmental stimuli. We are active agents, consciously thinking, planning, and directing our own lives. His most famous contribution here is probably reciprocal determinism.
Reciprocal determinism. That sounds important. Break it down for us.
It's a critical concept for understanding how personality develops and functions day to day. It rejects simple one-way cause and effect. Instead, Bandura proposed a dynamic three-way interaction model.
3 factors mutually influencing each other.
Exactly. Those factors are cognitions, our thoughts, beliefs, expectations, attitudes; behaviors, our actions, skills, choices; and environmental factors, the social context, rewards, punishments, other people's reactions.
And they're all influencing each other constantly, in a loop.
In a continuous dynamic loop, let's use a concrete example to make it stick.
Go ahead.
Think about someone with social anxiety.
Okay.
Their cognition might be, people will judge me negatively if I speak up. This cognition influences their behavior. They avoid social gatherings, stay quiet when they do attend, maybe avoid eye contact.
Right.
This behavior then influences the environment. Other people might perceive them as aloof or uninterested. Maybe they don't get invited to things, which then reinforces the original cognition. See? People don't like me. The loop continues, strengthening the anxiety and the associated behaviors.
Wow. That model makes the whole process feel much more active and maybe changeable.
That's the key insight. If you change one part of the loop, say, deliberately change the behavior by forcing yourself to speak up, even when anxious, it could potentially disrupt the cycle and change the cognitions and environmental responses over time.
That's powerful. Bandura also emphasized something else huge: observational learning.
Yes, a massive contribution. He showed that we learn huge portions of our behavior, our attitudes, our emotional responses, simply by watching other people, models, and observing the consequences of their actions. We don't always need direct reinforcement ourselves.
Learning by imitation.
Learning by imitation, modeling, vicarious reinforcement, it's incredibly efficient. Think about how children learn language, social norms, even complex skills. A lot of it is observational.
He also refined Rotter's idea of expectancies, right? Differentiating between 2 types.
He did. He distinguished between outcome expectations and efficacy expectations.
Okay, what's the difference?
Outcome expectations are your predictions about what tangible outcome will likely follow a behavior. If I exercise regularly behavior, I expect the outcome will be weight loss.
Seems straightforward.
Efficacy expectations, however, are much more personal. They are your beliefs about your own ability to successfully perform the specific behaviors needed to produce those outcomes.
Ah, so it's about self-belief. Can I actually do the thing?
Exactly. You might have a positive outcome expectation, exercising leads to weight loss, but if your efficacy expectation is low, I'm too uncoordinated, I have no willpower, I can never stick to an exercise plan, you probably won't even try, or you'll give up easily.
So that belief in your own capabilities, self-efficacy, is a massive driver of whether you even start and whether you persist through challenges.
Huge. Bandura considered self-efficacy a cornerstone of human agency and achievement.
Okay. And the third key figure, Walter Mischel. He famously stirred the pot on the whole trait versus situation debate.
He certainly did. Mischel argued forcefully that behavior is influenced strongly, sometimes even primarily, by the specific situation, not just by broad underlying personality traits. But he didn't just focus on the situation. He also emphasized the cognitive factors within the person that interact with the situation.
So he acknowledged both situation variables and person variables.
Precisely. Situation variables are the external environmental factors, the immediate rewards, punishments, constraints, social cues in that specific context.
And person variables, these are internal.
Yes, these are the internal cognitive factors that the individual brings to the situation. Mischel expanded on Rotter's ideas here. His person variables included expectancies, both outcome and efficacy, and subjective values, but he added several others.
Like what?
Things like competencies, the actual knowledge, skills, and abilities you possess relevant to the situation. Your encoding strategies, how you personally perceive, interpret, and categorize events. Is that critical comment an insult or helpful feedback? Different people encode it differently.
The perception piece seems crucial.
It is. And he also included self-regulatory systems and plans. This is our ability to set goals, make plans, delay gratification, monitor our own behavior, and use self-reward or self-punishment to guide ourselves toward long-term objectives, even without immediate external feedback.
Like deciding to study for an exam weeks in advance instead of going out.
Exactly. That's self-regulation in action. It's the internal operating system that allows us to manage ourselves and pursue goals over time.
So looking at the social cognitive perspective overall, its strength seems to be its grounding in measurable learning principles, but updated to include our internal thoughts and beliefs.
Yes, it brought learning theory into the cognitive era. It highlighted observational learning, self-efficacy, locus of control, concepts that have been incredibly influential.
And it led directly to powerful therapeutic approaches.
Absolutely. Cognitive behavior therapy, CBT, one of the most effective forms of therapy today, is built directly on social cognitive principles, identifying and changing maladaptive thoughts, cognitions, and behaviors. It gives people clear levers to pull for change.
What are the criticisms, though? What does it miss?
Well, the main criticisms often come from, say, the psychodynamic and biological camps. By focusing so intensely on observable learning and conscious or preconscious cognition, critics argue it tends to ignore or downplay the potential role of deeper unconscious processes and conflicts that Freud highlighted.
And maybe the genetic component.
And often, yes, it doesn't fully integrate the stable, possibly genetically influenced trait differences that the trait theorists emphasize. It presents a somewhat limited view of the whole person, perhaps missing the deeper biological roots and the hidden unconscious elements.
Okay, we started in the dark depths of the id, navigated the objective measurements of traits, and analyzed the cognitive loops of learning. Now we arrive at what feels like the most optimistic, forward-looking view, the humanistic perspective.
It definitely has that quality. This school of thought, really championed by thinkers like Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, takes a fundamentally different stance. It believes that personality is expressed primarily through our conscious experience of directing ourselves toward fulfilling our unique, innate potential.
Seeing humans as inherently good, motivated for growth.
Yes, that's a core assumption. It emphasizes subjective experience, free will, and the innate drive towards growth and self-improvement.
Let's start with Carl Rogers. His model is called self-theory.
Correct. Rogers' model centers on this innate drive towards self-actualization, the lifelong process of realizing and fulfilling one's unique potential and becoming the best version of oneself.
And how does personality develop according to Rogers? It hinges on self-esteem.
Very much so. He argued that our initial sense of self-worth, our self-esteem, largely mirrors how significant others, especially parents, value us or fail to value us in early life.
So how parents treat us shapes how we see ourselves.
Critically so. Rogers argued that the crucial element for fostering psychological health is unconditional positive regard.
Unconditional positive regard. What does that mean exactly?
It means parents and others should bestow acceptance, love, and prizing on the child that is not conditional on the child's specific behaviors or achievements. It's loving the child for who they are, fundamentally, regardless of whether they meet expectations or behave perfectly.
So even if the child messes up, the parent still conveys underlying love and acceptance.
Exactly. The behavior might be disapproved of, but the child's intrinsic worth is never questioned. Rogers believed this allows children to develop a strong, secure sense of self, trusting their own feelings and experiences.
And the alternative?
The alternative is conditional positive regard. This is where love, approval, and acceptance are only given when the child behaves in ways the parents deem correct or socially approved. I only love you when you get good grades, or you're only a good boy when you're quiet.
That sounds damaging.
Rogers thought it was very damaging. It leads the child to develop what he called conditions of worth. They learn to think of themselves as worthwhile only when they meet these external standards or expectations.
So they start ignoring their own true feelings or desires.
Precisely. They develop a fundamental disconnect, an incongruence between their true, authentic self, their organismic experience, and the self-concept they feel they have to present to the world to be loved. They start living according to others' values, not their own.
And ultimately, Rogers argued, our adult self-esteem reflects this.
Yes. He suggested our self-esteem becomes a function of the gap or congruence between our actual self, as we perceive it, and our self-ideals, that idealized sense of how or what we think we should be, often based on those internalized conditions of worth.
The smaller the gap, the better.
The smaller the gap, the greater the congruence, the higher the self-esteem, and the closer the person is to self-actualization.
Okay. And Abraham Maslow, the other giant of humanistic psychology, he shared this belief in self-actualization.
Very much so. Maslow also believed strongly in an innate human drive towards self-actualization, seeing it as the highest human need, at the top of his famous hierarchy. He saw it as motivating the development of our unique potentials.
How did he view personality?
For Maslow, personality wasn't a fixed thing to be measured, but a continuous dynamic process of personal growth and realization. He believed psychological health requires a deep awareness and, crucially, acceptance of all parts of oneself. Our unique feelings, desires, needs, even the parts we might not like. Only by accepting the whole self can we move towards fulfilling our ultimate potential and having peak experiences.
It's interesting, this focus on the self, but how we even define ourselves seems heavily influenced by culture, doesn't it?
Absolutely critical point. How we conceptualize ourselves, whether primarily as an independent individual or as part of a social network, is profoundly shaped by the cultural context we grew up in.
You mean like collectivistic cultures versus individualistic cultures?
Exactly. In many Asian, African, and Latin American cultures, which tend to be more collectivistic, the emphasis is overwhelmingly on social roles, group harmony, obligations to the family or community.
So the self is defined by relationships.
Largely, yes. Values like conformity, interdependence, respecting elders, and avoiding conflict are paramount. The self is seen as fundamentally connected to and defined by its place within the group structure. Major life decisions are often made based on what's best for the collective, not just the individual.
And contrast that with individualistic cultures, like, say, the US or Western Europe.
In these cultures, the emphasis is fiercely placed on the individual personal identity, unique attributes, individual achievements, self-expression, personal goals, and self-sufficiency.
The autonomous self.
The autonomous self is primary. Values stress, independence, uniqueness, competition, and the right to pursue personal desires. This fundamental difference in defining the self changes everything: how we approach relationships, work, success, even how we experience emotions.
So evaluating the humanistic perspective, its strengths are clear. It brought conscious experience, free will, and the sense of self back into psychology.
Definitely. It was a necessary and valuable third force counterpoint to the perceived negativity of psychoanalysis and the mechanistic view of behaviorism. And it led to highly influential therapeutic approaches like Rogers' client-centered therapy, which emphasizes empathy and unconditional positive regard from the therapist.
But the criticisms are similar to those of psychoanalysis in some ways, aren't they? The difficulty of studying it scientifically.
That's the main one. How do you objectively measure concepts like self-actualization or unique potential or congruence? These are inherently private, subjective experiences, making rigorous scientific testing very challenging.
Any other criticisms?
Some critics also contend that the intense focus on self-fulfillment and self-actualization might, if taken to an extreme, inadvertently promote self-centeredness, narcissism, or a lack of concern for others or societal responsibilities. Is the goal always just about me becoming my best self?
The potential downside. Yet the humanists maybe provided the clearest, most practical roadmap for actively improving one's psychological well-being.
I think that's fair. Drawing directly from Rogers and Maslow, we can identify concrete, actionable steps people can take to build more robust self-esteem and move towards greater fulfillment.
What would those be?
Well, one key is to actively seek to acquire competencies. Become demonstrably good at something you value, whether it's a skill, a hobby, knowledge. Competence builds genuine self-worth.
Makes sense. Don't just wish you were good, become good.
Right. Another is to set realistic, achievable goals. Success breeds success and builds that sense of capability. This ties directly back to Bandura, two deliberately working to enhance self-efficacy expectations. Build the belief that you can master tasks and challenges.
What else?
Perhaps more fundamentally, humanism suggests we need to consciously create a sense of meaningfulness in life. Connect your daily actions to larger values or purposes that transcend just getting through the day.
And challenge that need for everyone else's approval.
Yes. Proactively challenge that deeply ingrained need for constant external approval that Rogers believed stems from conditional positive regard in childhood. Learn to validate yourself from the inside out, based on your own values and experiences.
Okay, so we have these four really distinct, often conflicting maps for understanding personality: the deep unconscious, the stable traits, the learned cognitions, the drive for potential. How do psychologists actually go beyond just theorizing and formally measure these complex characteristics in real people?
That's where personality assessment comes in. They generally rely on two main categories of tools: objective tests, which aim for empirical standardized measurement, and projective tests, which try to tap into those deeper, perhaps unconscious layers.
Let's start with objective tests. These sound more straightforward.
They are, in a way. Objective tests are typically self-report personality inventories. These are structured psychological tests using formal, standardized methods, meaning the individual is usually presented with a series of clear statements or questions about their typical thoughts, feelings, or behaviors, and they have to respond using a limited range of options like true or false, agree or disagree, or maybe a numerical scale like 1 to 5.
And because the questions and the scoring are standardized, they're considered objective.
Exactly. The scoring is predetermined and doesn't rely much on the clinician's interpretation, making them more reliable and easier to compare across individuals.
What's a famous example?
The classic, and still one of the most widely used, is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, the MMPI. It's a very long test.
Hundreds of true-false questions.
Hundreds, yes. It was originally constructed specifically to help clinicians diagnose various psychological disorders by identifying distinct patterns of responses that tend to be characteristic of different conditions like depression, paranoia, schizophrenia, etc.
Is it only used for diagnosis?
No, while it's still heavily used in clinical settings, versions of it are also used in forensic contexts, personnel selection, counseling. It provides a broad profile of personality characteristics and potential problem areas.
And these objective tests, are they generally considered good tools?
Generally, yes. When well constructed and validated, like the MMPI or many Big Five inventories, they tend to have good reliability, consistency, and validity, measuring what they claim to measure. They're also relatively inexpensive and efficient to administer and score, especially with computers.
But there must be limitations.
The main limitation is pretty clear. Because they rely on self-report, they are potentially vulnerable to conscious distortion or bias from the person taking the test.
People might not answer honestly.
Right. People might want to present themselves in a better light, this social desirability bias. They might try to fake good to seem healthier or more stable, or sometimes even fake bad if they think there's some advantage to appearing distressed. Good tests often have built-in validity scales to try and detect these response patterns, but it's always a potential issue.
Okay, so if objective tests rely on conscious self-report, that leads us to the second category: projective tests. These sound like they're trying to get around conscious control.
That's exactly the idea. Projective tests are born directly out of the psychodynamic tradition, particularly Freud's ideas about the unconscious. They are designed specifically to tap into those deeper unconscious needs, motives, drives, and conflicts by bypassing conscious defenses.
How do they do that?
They rely on presenting the individual with ambiguous or vague test materials stimuli that don't have a clear, predetermined meaning. The core assumption is that when faced with ambiguity, people will unconsciously project aspects of their own hidden personality, their needs, fears, desires, conflicts, onto these neutral stimuli in order to make sense of them.
Their interpretation reveals something about their inner world.
That's the theory. The two most iconic examples are essential to know. First, the Rorschach test.
Think what?
The famous ink blots, developed by Hermann Rorschach. It typically consists of 10 symmetrical ink blots, some black and white, some with color. The person is simply asked, what might this be?
And the scoring isn't just about what they see.
No. Comprehensive scoring systems, like the Exner system, analyze much more than just the content. For example, seeing animals versus humans. They look at how the person responds. Do they use the whole blot or just details? Do they focus on form, color, or perceived movement? Do they give popular or unusual responses? All these factors are interpreted to reveal underlying personality structure, cognitive style, emotional responses, reality testing.
Wow, complex. And the second big one?
The thematic apperception test, or T8, developed by Henry Murray and Christiana Morgan. This uses a series of pictures depicting ambiguous scenes involving people.
Ambiguous scenes, like...
Maybe a young boy looking at a violin, a woman standing in a doorway, an older woman and a younger man. The situations are unclear. The person is asked to tell a complete story about each picture. What led up to this scene? What are the characters thinking and feeling right now? What will the outcome be?
And the stories they tell are supposed to reveal.
The assumption is that the storyteller will identify with the protagonist in the story and project their own psychological needs, like need for achievement, affiliation, power, conflicts, concerns, and ways of dealing with relationships onto the characters and the plot they create.
These projective tests sound endlessly fascinating, but also maybe subjective.
That's the major criticism. While fascinating, they face serious questions regarding their psychometric properties, specifically their reliability and validity.
Meaning?
Reliability asks, if two different clinicians score the same Rorschach responses, will they reach the same conclusions? Often, inter-rater reliability has been lower than desirable, though standardized scoring systems have improved this somewhat. Validity asks, does the test truly measure what it claims to measure, raising unconscious conflicts? And does it predict relevant future behaviors? The evidence here is often mixed and controversial.
Any other specific problems?
One technical issue is called stimulus pull. Even though the stimuli are meant to be ambiguous, sometimes subtle cues within them, maybe a figure in a tack card looks particularly gloomy, or an ink blot has shapes that strongly suggest something specific, can unintentionally pull for certain types of responses from almost anyone.
So the response might reflect the card itself, not the person's unique projection.
Exactly. It contaminates the interpretation, potentially weakening the claim that it's a pure window into the individual's unique unconscious. So their clinical usefulness remains debated, though many clinicians still find them valuable for generating hypotheses or exploring complex issues.
Okay, we have covered a massive landscape today. Feels like a whirlwind tour of the psyche.
It really is. We started way down in the deep, turbulent waters of the Freudian unconscious, didn't we? Driven by that relentless pleasure principle of the id, managed by the often suffering ego, judged by the superego.
Then we move to the more scientific, empirical efforts to map personality through the trait perspective, eventually settling on those measurable, seemingly stable factors of the Big Five ocean.
Right. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, the descriptive building blocks.
Then we landed firmly in the realm of learning and thinking with the social cognitive perspective, seeing how our thoughts, behaviors, and environment constantly shape each other through reciprocal determinism, and how crucial our beliefs about control and capability, locus of control and efficacy expectations really are.
Showing us clear pathways for potential change through modifying those cognitions and behaviors.
And finally, we looked upward, maybe, toward human potential, guided by that innate drive towards self-actualization championed by Rogers, Maslow, and the humanists, emphasizing conscious choice and growth.
A journey from determinism towards agency, in a way. And throughout, we've seen this recurring theme. Personality seems to be this incredibly complex, dynamic mix of stable internal traits, learned patterns of thinking and behaving, and perhaps deeper psychological drives or potentials.
And we established that genetics plays a significant role in those stable traits, maybe 40, 50, even 55% of the variability.
A substantial biological foundation.
So, let's leave our listeners with a final provocative thought to chew on. Given everything we've explored, the genetic wiring, the power of learned cognitions and behaviors, the potential for conscious striving, where do you think the greatest leverage lies for deliberately influencing your own long-term personality development?
Is your best bet to, metaphorically speaking, dive deep and try to understand and resolve those potential unconscious conflicts, as the psychodynamic folks might suggest?
Or, drawing from the social cognitive perspective, is the most powerful approach to consciously work on changing your environment, modifying your behaviors, challenging your limiting beliefs, and deliberately building that sense of self-efficacy and an internal locus of control.
Where does the most practical power for personal evolution reside? In understanding the depths, measuring the traits, or actively reshaping the cognitive behavioral loops? Something to think about.
Thank you for taking this deep dive into the very core of who we are. We'll see you next time.